I'm so glad you stopped by today. I was thinking we could read a story. When I was working with very young children, my greatest joy was story time because the children they were so engaged. I know that you at home, you know what I'm talking about. You know how your children just get excited when it's time for a story. Because here's an opportunity for them to learn so much language just by listening. Did you know that's how children learn language? By listening and hearing language spoken around them? That's why it's so important to talk to your children all the time. Talk to them about what they're doing so that you give words, and I'm going to use all these fancy terms, but let's just say you give words to what they're doing, maybe what they're thinking, or what they'd like to say. So it doesn't matter what age, reading aloud is important all the time. I even have friends who are adults who read aloud to one another because there is pleasure in listening to the spoken word. So no matter how old your children are, you might think about having story time. Whether you're listening to a book on tape or you're taking turns reading a story, that's really a fun way. When you read just a page, and then the next person reads the next page, and on and on and on. And then after each chapter or each couple of pages, you talk about what's happened. You ask, why do you think the character did that? Or what do you think's going to happen next? Or did you ever have anything like that happen to you? This is the way you build critical thinking. It doesn't matter whether you're an adult or a child. Critical thinking is something that we all need to engage in all the time. Because the more synapses that are happening in our brain, the more that we're going to retain and the more we're going to be able to use later. That's how we build those associations in the brain that help our brain really function well. Well, enough of that. Let's find a story. I don't know if we should do a bargain for Francis, which has always been one of my favorites, the Francis stories. But here's Frog and Toad. Now, when my daughter was a little girl, we read Frog and Toad all the time. So if you have a Frog and Toad book, you could read along with us. Should I give you a minute to try and find it? Well, while I look for the story, I'm going to read, I think it's called The Button. If you have that book, go get it right now. And I'm going to find it here in this book and get all ready for us to read together. So why don't you get your book and come and sit over here next to me so that we can read the book together. A Lost Button. I have to turn to the right page. Of course, you see how I'm turning the pages, don't you? Up at the top, and I'm gently turning the page, because if you turn down here, you ever get a book and you see that rip on the bottom of the page? That's because somebody's been doing this. So, when I was in school, we were all trained to turn the pages of the book up at the top. So I'm going to pass that on to you because I think it's really important. Here we go. A Lost Button. And here's Frog and Toad. Can you tell which one is the frog and which one is the toad? One is green and one is brown. Which one is the toad? Toad and Frog went for a long walk. They walked across a large meadow. They walked in the woods. They walked along the river. At last, they went back home to Toad's house. "Oh, drat," said Toad. "Not only do my feet hurt, but I have lost one of the buttons on my jacket." Oh my gosh. Do you know how it is to lose a button? They're so hard to find. Let's turn the page. "Don't worry," said Frog. "We will go back to all the places where we walked. We will soon find your button." They walked back to the large meadow, and they began to look for the button in the tall grass. Wow, look how tall the grass is. The grass is taller than Toad. Look at Frog over here. See how high the grass is? He Here's your button, cried Frog. That is not my button, said Toad. That button is black. My button was white. Toad put the black button in his pocket. Turn the page. A sparrow flew down. Excuse me, said the sparrow. Did you lose a button? I found one. That is not my button, said Toad. That button has 2 holes. My button had 4 holes. Toad put the button with the 2 holes in his pocket. See the sparrow? Sparrow came down to help. Sparrow's a beautiful bird. Perhaps we'll look for one when we're out walking next time. They went back to the woods and looked on the dark paths. Here's your button, said Frog. That is not my button, cried Toad. That button is small. My button was big. Toad put the small button in his pocket. He's getting a lot of buttons in that pocket, isn't he? A raccoon came out from behind a tree. I heard that you were looking for a button, he said. Here's one that I just found. Oh, that is not my button, wailed Toad. That button is square. My button was round. And Toad put the square button in his pocket. See the raccoon? Don't you just love raccoons? They have that little mask over their eyes. Frog and Toad went back to the river. They looked for the button in the mud. Here's your button, said Frog. That's not my button, shouted Toad. That button is thin. My button was thick. Toad put the thin button in his pocket. He was very angry. He jumped up and down and screamed, "The whole world is covered with buttons, and not one of them is mine." Toad ran home and slammed the door. Oh my gosh, can you believe it? And there, on the floor, he saw his white, 4-holed, big, round, thick button. "Oh," said Toad. "It was here all the time. What a lot of trouble I have made for Frog." Toad took all the buttons out of his pocket. He took his sewing box down from the shelf. Toad sewed all the buttons all over his jacket. The next day, Toad gave his jacket to Frog. Wasn't that lovely of him? Frog thought that it was beautiful. He put it on and jumped for joy. Look how happy he is. None of the buttons fell off. Toad had sewed them on very well. Wasn't that a lovely thing that happened? Sometimes blessings come in ways that we don't expect. And when we get them, we jump for joy. I hope you enjoyed reading with me today. As I said, these are one of my favorite stories. Will you come again? I hope so. See you later.